gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Elemental Collision. I keep on trying to confuse this with my other podcast, Two Daves and a Doc. Well, I do not have two docs on here or two Daves, so this always makes it easy. But today I'm joined with by Brian Gumm from Roastery Roasting Company, and as well as my good buddy Alex Caza from Firstbloom. So, gentlemen, it is a pleasure to have you on here to talk about coffee and community, of all things.
Thanks very much.
Shocking.
Thanks for having me.
So, Brian, we're going to start a little bit with you since you're the new guy on the block here, on chopping block,
Sure.
as it were. So let's get a little bit of your background. Why'd you get into roasting coffee, or why'd you get into coffee in general? And yeah, let's hear a little bit of your history there.
Yeah, I think my earliest memories of coffee in general go back to my childhood. I grew up in the rural Midwest in the state of Iowa, and one of my family members who took care of me when I was a kid while my parents were working were my cousins that were farmers that lived just south of the town that I grew up in. So my parents didn't drink coffee at home, but my much older second cousin, once removed or something like that, she and her husband drank coffee all the time, and it was like Iowa farmer coffee. So, you know, it was like one of the big nostalgic brands that is still very much prominent here in the rural Midwest, because I still live in rural Iowa. And she made it really watery. And I remember tasting it when I was a kid and thinking that this is just kind of, it's like dirty water. So I didn't necessarily have fond early memories of coffee, and I didn't actually start drinking coffee until I was working in the tech industry, which was my first career out of college, well, during and after college. And it was still not very good coffee, but it was really a social element. I worked for a small software company in the e-commerce industry in the late 90s, and we would gather around the coffee pot in the morning and talk about nerdy stuff. And then I got hooked on the drug of caffeine. So like then it became kind of like a chemical and social thing. The coffee still tasted horrible. In my mid-20s, my wife got me a French press. And so I started dabbling in like making my own coffee at home, buying slightly better coffee. And then it just progressed slowly into my mid-30s. And I was at graduate school at the time in Virginia on the East Coast in the US. And I met a few roasters, like home roasters in the town that we lived in. It was a small city in the western part of the state. And they were really cool people that I was already friends with. And I'm like, oh, they roast coffee at home? That's weird and kind of cool. So like I just upped my coffee quality game, and then was introduced to the craft of roasting, at least, you know, through conversation. And then after grad school, 8 years ago, we moved back to our home state of Iowa, and we now live in my wife's hometown where she grew up, which is about an hour from where I grew up. And I had gotten spoiled on good coffee, and then it was gone. And then we moved back, you know, I was like, where, you know, how am I going to do this? I can't order stuff off the internet all the time. So I was like, well, these guys did it at home, and I was kind of interested in starting a new hobby. So I was looking at craft beer brewing, which my dad had done a little bit of when I was in high school, and coffee roasting at home, and did research and knew a little bit about both. And like coffee was much cheaper, easier, and faster of a process and a turnaround, than brewing beer at home. So I was like, well, I mean, if all I need to do is like buy a popcorn popper and throw like a little bit of coffee beans in there, then that doesn't sound too hard. And that's what I did, and I was hooked on roasting immediately. So I did that as a hobbyist for a year and a half. So I was in my mid-30s when I started it, and then 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago, I started drawing up a crappy business plan, which I'd never done before, and kind of shopped around for some investors because I'd just gotten out of grad school and bought a house. So like I had two very large loans, and and I was no longer working in the tech industry, so I wasn't making very good money anymore. So, and so I was like, well, I can't start this myself. So I needed some investment capital. Found some investor partners through a personal connection, but they're not family, so it's like they're close but not too close. And they're located in another state here in the United States. So it was a good working arrangement, and that's still the arrangement of the company today. We have like equal partnership in the business. I was the idea and the muscle and the sweat, and they were the investors and helped provide some accountability that I needed for, financials and all that good stuff. And yeah, so Raw Street Roasting was born in 2015. We were in the spring of 2015. By the fall, we were fully licensed to operate as a food manufacturer in the state of Iowa. Because of my tech background, we opened with an online store on day one. And we've kind of really stuck in that online e-commerce direct to consumer channel pretty strongly all throughout our years of operation. We do have a commercial side of our business, but our really strong focus has been and continues to be, and probably will be, our relationship with direct to consumers through the web and e-commerce, social media, all that good stuff. So that's kind of the story of how I got to where I am. Yeah, that's how I got it. My life story with coffee.
There you go. I find it fascinating because Alex and I had this conversation last time, his pedigree in the software industry as well, right? It's all us tech guys tend to, it's not the water cooler anymore, it's the coffee pot.
Yeah, yeah.
Seems to be one of those formative experiences that we all have, right? I'm in tech as well. Alex has been in tech. And, his company is very technologically minded as well. But
and I've seen a lot of other people besides myself kind of like go in and out of both. And I'm now back in the tech industry. So like I work for a tech company again, based here in Iowa. So and then maintain, kind of ownership and oversight of the operation of the coffee business. But yeah, it's those barriers are pretty permeable. I've seen it happen a lot.
So how did you, and we found each other via social media as well, kind of a uninvolved third party that was floating out there. I think turned into one of those weird conversations. Again, it was a tech person that was looking for good coffee and wanted to step into the space. And I think Alex got roped in early, and he's like, "Hey, you found this. We arrived at you separately. I would have you know." And it was fascinating how that kind of, like this community aspect of stuff, which I suppose is an interesting digression in just a bit. So Alex, we talked 2 months ago. We've talked every month since, which I know means that we've talked one other time. But, in the interstitial period, I mean, I've had the privilege of getting to know you, getting to know Firstbloom as well, and your co-founder a little bit. How has your path gone even, give us a refresher in the interim. Like, what are you seeing? Like, have things kind of changed? Are you seeing dynamics shifting, or are you, what's going on in your world?
I think since we last spoke, the biggest thing has been the validation of what we're trying to accomplish in more meaningful ways, and starting to see that kind of, the knowledge gap that exists between roaster and consumer. And Brian, I'm sure you can speak to this as well, that there is this need that people have to understand what they're brewing at home. And there's this want for roasters to be able to confidently give people their product and be like, yeah, I know you're going to nail it. But there's no way in hell that I have the time to be able to guide every single person through this process. And what we're seeing is that recurring theme of that gap needing to be validated and needing to be filled. We've grown a bit, and we're not focused on growth at this stage in our company. We're still being really intentional about who we bring on and our customers themselves, so that we can validate our product and make sure that we're building something that's actually meaningful. But with the 20 or so customers that we have now, and like we finally crossed our 1,000 MRR milestone, which feels fantastic considering we're not aiming for growth. But that's giving us a perfect test bed of people who have a diverse set of equipment, a diverse background, and it's really become this kind of beautiful user study that we're getting paid for, and we're able to give these people agency, like we talked about last time, over their coffee. And the biggest thing that we've unlocked now as a business is trying to think about it from a perspective of friendliness. That's kind of our new core value that we've added on top of empathy and agency. And it ties in directly with empathy, but it's the layer of being your buddy. Like the conversation we're having now, you and I, Dave, will go over DMs on like grinders and like this new thing and that new toy that you just picked up. Sorry. And it's having that buddy that you can ping ideas off of, and not trying to be a service, but to be your friend and someone that can guide you through that process. Because it's really unfortunate, but that's the only way you can learn right now, is you have that buddy who's like gung-ho and who's like, holy shit, you need to try this thing, do this thing, try this, whatever. I'm super excited. Bear with me. And we want to be that for you. We want to be that person that you can text at 3 a.m, like, I'm dreaming about coffee, and we'll be like, fuck yeah, So that's kind of the new core pillar that we're trying to incorporate, both in a human way, but also in a digital way, which is going to be really, really fascinating, I think.
Yeah, it's an interesting sensitization, right? People have had to have forced isolation. I've talked about this for at least for months now. It feels like, and us being social animals, us wanting to build these communities, and I'm going to get to that community question in a second, but like that intentionality, right? That in tech, and we all have experience with that. We always talk about this concept of trusted advisors, right? That's like the leading thing a salesman does when he walks in the door. We want to be your trusted advisors. I mean, half the time it's bullshit, right? We want you to write that check because, daddy needs to buy his, new wheels or kind of situation, right? But the other side of that is, I think you're starting to see, for all intents and purposes, that B2B, B2C type concept where this becomes, like you're saying, the 3 a.m. call. It says, I can't get this off my mind. And Brian, to echo what you're saying, I've been drinking this dirty water, Boston songs notwithstanding, Charles, dirty water. But I've been having this thing, I've been drinking this absolute swill, for the longest time. And I know there's something more. It's not just the best part of waking up is that big, multinational corporation in my cup anymore. Yeah, right. Well, like Alex, you got to talk to Julie. I mean, Julie was fantastic, but that's where it becomes this kind of integration, this kind of nexus point of like, hey, I have something for you. It's going to be different. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be unique and special. And in that way, you kind of set up these North Stars for people. You say, hey, listen, this is what it could be. Let's get you there. And let's figure it out one cup at a time, if you will. So to that point about community, Brian, I want to start with you. How do you define community these days? What's changed? Or, even if you look a year back or look a year forward, how does community look to you?
I think I'm in a period of like profound disorientation, and will hopefully move through a period of like reorientation around my understanding of what constitutes community. I've had some philosophies about community in my head over the past number of years that have kind of been shattered. And in the coffee community anyway, I guess, on a basic level, I'm cheating because I just listened to your two the conversation that you had back in November this morning. So like I know what Alex said, and I liked it. And he mentioned it here just a bit ago in talking about what they're doing with Firstbloom, and it revolves around friendship. Was the word he just used, but then the other word he used was trust in the conversation you two had back in November. And I love that. I love those two words. One of our core values as a business is relationships, and you can't have community without relationships, but you can't have community without trust. And I don't think you can have really good community without friendship. Friendliness, kindness, hospitality, those are words that mean good things to me when I think about community. And I've in the coffee community, which for me, as long as I've been a professional, a hobbyist and then a professional, that has been almost like at least 85% mediated by the internet. Because I live in the middle of nowhere, and I was the only coffee snob in a town of 5,000 people, and the closest city, there's 5 cities that are around where I live, but they're all an hour away, all of them. So, you know, and so I don't get to go to the cool coffee shops. I have to do it at home, which is fine, because that's how I started, and I enjoy making coffee at home a lot. But it wasn't the cafe community that got me into coffee. It was a couple friends that I had that I no longer lived near, so I had to communicate with over the web when I got into roasting. And as soon as I got into that, I found the virtual community around specialty coffee to be a really awesome group of people that are generally very friendly, kind, generous with their knowledge. And it's been great. Like I really appreciate that as a professional in an industry where I don't have people that I physically bump into in that industry, almost at all, especially now. So that's kind of what coffee and community has meant to me over the past 5 years of being a business owner in the industry.
Alex, any further insights from your side of the I was gonna say your side of the border, but come on.
We're on the internet. The border doesn't exist anymore.
We're all digital citizens, as the case may be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I feel like the only thing that I could add is to really echo that point about specialty being a really friendly community. And it's definitely been that, like, I guess I'm trying to verbalize my fears as well without it sounding too pessimistic. But I feel like we're at that tipping point now of the industry where there are a lot more people who are coming in with different incentives, and it's starting to shift the framing of a lot of the conversations towards that like personal gain perspective, and we're losing a little bit of that cooperation, which I think is the unfortunate part of business structures in general and the way that we have it. Whole other conversation. But I think where we're going is interesting in the sense that there's one side that's pushing for democratization of knowledge in a really, really deep and meaningful way. And there's another side that's trying to guard the small slivers of industry in really kind of detrimental ways. And you have a lot of these big companies who are starting to buy up a lot of the quote unquote independent small players, and they're starting to shift things in ways that are going to become even more ethically dubious. And I think that what we're seeing right now from a community perspective is everyone wants to challenge that, but we don't have the tools to do so effectively yet. And I think that that's where getting to a better sense of transparency and also trust is going to be the core underpinning of a successful coffee community going forward, and removing brand and ego from the equation as much as possible, and making sure that people have agency over their decisions and they understand the implications of them is still the core fundamental thing of making sure that specialty and community work together hand in hand.
That's great. I like the extrapolation there. I mean, I think it's interesting having been, or never done this for revenue, but having worked in, a friend's coffee shop and, seeing that kind of Starbucks versus the world kind of mentality, right? There's Starbucks, and then there's the small, local kind of concept, right? I guess I privileged in that regard to be able to have that opportunity. And I've worked for Starbucks, 20 years ago, which ages me quite a bit. But, that being said, I think that inevitable collision, I mean, Brian touched on the home brewing situation or the brewing situation. And microbreweries went through this and still are going through this, right? You see that kind of large multinational corporations that suddenly buy the little guys, and then, we're not gonna lose that kind of small town flavor. Yeah, you may not lose the person, but you've lost the identification. You've lost the idea, and it becomes hard, especially as consumers, where as I look into your world, right? Because I'm a consumer of your product. Truly, as of today, I am. like as I look into that world, right, and having done the supply side and worked with Sweet Maria's and a couple of these other kind of different places and roasting myself, yeah, that differentiation becomes hard. Do you accede to the ideals of what other people are doing? Do you become selfish, if you will, with what you own, what you know, what you have? Or do you kind of level set and say you build that trust because you understand that all these little paving stones end up equaling the road that you're going to travel on, that you end up building towards something that's even better? And I think it's very hard, especially in an economy which has collapsed in and of itself, right? And talking worldwide, right? Where you see these things, it's no longer brick and mortar so much as it is. It's that direct to consumer. It's that, it's a different kind of ideology that people are having. They step into it. We have this joke in the podcast world. Everybody's doing interesting conversations within podcasts. What makes you different? Stop doing that. Well, I do this because I love doing it. It's not because I have any kind of super massive investment. I mean, I do, but like investment on the other side of it. But this is a passion project. It's something that I can do, and thankfully I'm blessed in order to do it. Right. So there's a lot of parallels between these things. So I find it interesting that you guys have both approached things. Well, you're both on supply side, if you will, one, different flavors of that, so to speak. It'll be interesting to see how the years ahead, how things shift, right? If you see that kind of, shift into that micro roastery concept, right? Home, everybody's a micro roastery, everybody's a micro provider of their own stuff, or see these pockets as they build out.
So I actually, on that topic of the micro roastery, it's something that, and I also love Brian's take on it too, being on the like the actual side of roasting. It's a very like it's an Asian model, I guess, where you see a lot more cafe roasters. And my time in Japan a couple of years ago really highlighted that, where I went to visit, and pretty much any cafe that was worth its own weight would be a roaster as well. And it's kind of starting to trickle down into Montreal as well, and the idea is starting to blossom. A lot of cafes are shifting to roasting their own stuff because it's a more sustainable model for them economically, and it creates a lot more, not diversity necessarily, but it challenges people to do more interesting things outside of just sourcing, and figure out branding and figure out how they communicate and build that trust within their own like 3-block radius of their cafe community. And it seems like that's the way the industry is going to push, I think, in terms of that like microbrewery aspect of small cafe roasters who buy and sell to themselves, but also direct to consumer for the people who come in and want to take that home. So it's this weird, like interesting dilution of what is the roasting market, but also it creates more, I guess, social ownership in communities, which is really interesting. Anyway, I love, Brian, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, you have my gears really grinding. And so the aspect of community that I did not talk about was our local community where we're based. My membership in the specialty coffee community, like I said, has been all, almost entirely mediated by the internet. But I have a community, a physical community that I live in and that my business is based in. I started the business in my garage, which I'm looking at outside my window. And now, our shop is just like a couple miles away on the other side of town. And we started this in a, rural areas have been socioeconomically on the decline for decades. And I'm 41 years old, and I grew up in a small rural town that was close to a city. So I kind of had a connection to that through that's where my parents worked. But now we're even farther out, and this is true in where I grew up as well. Like, I'm not that old. Like I was a child and an adolescent like 20, 30 years ago. And the difference in the quality of life socioeconomically in these areas is dramatically different than when I was a child. And it had already been on its way down for the 20 years before that. So this is a tough area to live in, and it's a tough area to start a new and interesting business model in. entrepreneurship is in very, very short supply in rural areas. So I say that to just say, like, the community, our local community, has been very excited and very supportive of our business for the whole time we've been in business. It's true, most of our revenue as a business does not come from our local community, but it's very supportive. Our 2 small local grocery stores carry our product, which is great. And we don't even target grocery as a roaster. Like, I don't want to be in grocery stores, but our 2 local groceries, like, they buy our product and they sell our product, and the local people love it. It's awesome. So I also think about community in terms of, like, my commitment to place. Even a place that's not really easy to live in for, somebody who's like a pretty solidly middle class white dude in a place where that's not really the norm. And so I kind of stick out a little bit, and it creates certain challenges for us, like on a personal level, just being in the community. So I don't know, I don't really have anything that's just something that I continue to really grapple with. Like, what does my relationship to our local community through this business mean? And how do I try to make a positive impact for the time that we're here? Because it might not last forever, but for the time that we're here, I want it to be as good as we can make it. And that's a very different community than the specialty coffee community. Very, like, and I mean, what I've been surprised about is that our customer base, we've really built a strong connection with online business to Iowa customers, like people in the state of Iowa. We have a really high number of customers in the state through our online business that don't have access to us through, like, brick and mortar. So they have to come to us through online, and they do. And a lot of them are in rural areas. And so, like, we're a specialty coffee roaster. I'm a coffee snob, like, but we're taking a product that was traditionally totally inaccessible to people like that in rural areas. And somehow we've created this brand that's, like, accessible and fun and friendly. And like, we've started to do a really good job of getting it out to people like that. And so, like, my community is also my customers. And that's a real relationship that I take seriously. And so it's like the weird borders, the spheres of communities, and the way sometimes those communities overlap and sometimes they really don't. And in my case, like, I think, mine don't really overlap all that much. So, like, when I go to the specialty coffee community, it's like a certain group of people with a certain set of backgrounds and dispositions. And then when I turn to my customer base, that's like a totally different group of people.
I think it's really fascinating. Like, we in an age where information for us is easy, right? I can hop on the internet, I can do these things. I mean, again, look at the way we were introduced to each other.
Yeah.
Some random guy in the middle of nowhere,
Yeah. Who are these guys? Am I mentioned?
Yeah, exactly. That we sometimes forget, and I've had this pointed out to me by several folks. It can almost seem hypocritical at times. It becomes easier for us to engage with people that are outside of our local sphere than it is for us to engage with people here. So, I mean, even Alex, to your point about the micro roastery concept within that, that 3-block radius becomes your nucleus of community, right? And a lot of times we're so used to going outside of that to get what we want that we forget that the importance is there, that if we have that agency, like literally in all aspects of that word, we have the ability to kind of create this little microcosm of community built around it, which is why I was impressed by Firstbloom anyway. The first go around is to kind of create that localized, small, nuclear, atomic, if you will, kind of agency in that space, in that time that you occupy the most, which is your house, your family, your friends, the people that you have to relate to on every day. But then look at our business models. I mean, a large multinational corporation I work for, the fact that you are, Brian, on, well, truly the international stage on Twitter, but relative to everything, you have that reach, you have that capability, Alex, the conversations you've had with people that I know across the ocean, as well. And the ability to influence those type of things. Again, it becomes really, really easy to have those asynchronous conversations and to build communities in ways that are new and exciting because we've had that technological provision. But it's amazing to be able to step back into your present, your day-to-day and say, hey, listen, I'm here. I can do stuff here. It doesn't matter that I'm the middle-aged white dude. And I have a year on you, Brian. So not to worry. Not the oldest one here, which is a good thing. But even that's a recognition that like, hey, I think that's also part of where, not to bring up politics at all, but I think this is where things have started to shift as well. We all of a sudden recognize the nature of who we are and where we're at in our space, in our time, in our in our beliefs, whether it be political or religious or otherwise, right? We suddenly are now very, very hyper aware of these things. And we start to act within those. It's that us versus them in the worst cases, but it's the Rabbi Sachs, Jonathan Sachs, who just recently passed, was famous for saying, it's turning the I to we, it's turning the me to us, and it's shifting that mentality and hopefully getting to that place where agency becomes all of us. It doesn't become just one of us. It doesn't, there's no necessary forcing function that's needed anymore. We've done it. We've created our microeconomies, our micro provision, and done this stuff. It's a lot of work I do at Dell. Yeah. Not supposed to name it, but whatever. Who cares? You can dump that. Sound like a curse word on here. But it's that moment. It's where we start to look at data as agency. We start to look at, for me, data is my coffee, I suppose. But that's the thing. That's the utility that's a commodity that I deal in. So because this is about coffee, and I brought props, and I'm always wanting to use props, I'm going to have each of you get to pick. There's a French press, an Aeropress, and a because Americans have to be so inventive. I'm looking at you, Freedom Fries. What was that about dumpster fires last time, Alex, that we talked about?
Oh man, I feel like my brain has been so overloaded these past 2 months that I'm kind of forgetting who you are right now, to be honest.
I'm forgetting who I am constantly. So every day is a new reinvention. All right, so I'm going to get the Canadian to talk about the American press, because that's hugely funny to me and ironic in all kinds of ways. So give us a rundown on this utility, this tool, and why this is what you believe to be the next evolution in coffee.
That's a lot of words in my mouth there, man.
You can change
it.
Yeah.
I actually hated the American press when I first tried it. I despised it as a device. It made no sense to me. And shout out to the local boutique / friend of mine, Cafuné. They're awesome retailer in Canada, but he has been championing that device for, I don't know, a year and a half now since he started. He's like, it's awesome. And every time I try it, everything came out flat. It didn't make sense to me. And I didn't understand what I was doing wrong at the time. And it unlocked when I realized that you are doing a hybrid immersion percolation brew. And you need to acknowledge that and work with it instead of trying to push it to do things that it will not get you to. So that means high concentration, 1 to 14, and taking your time with it, right? And so the reason why this thing is so amazing is that the bit on the bottom for people watching on video screws into a top bit, and that's where the coffee goes. So the coffee is entirely contained in this puck-like mechanism. There's a screen on the bottom and a screen on the top. So that means that you're getting a lot less sediment, but you're still getting a really rich, oily French press-like experience, but without the tons of soot at the bottom, basically.
It's so true.
Yeah, and what you end up with is this really rich and creamy experience. So any coffee that is just inherently sweet, or that you don't want to highlight the acidity of, will work perfectly for that method. And just taking your time with it. It's a 4-minute brew. You're involved with it pretty much the entire time. It's honestly the best of both worlds, and cleaning it is just a dream, honestly.
I can attest to the cleaning part. Is there a particular roast that you think goes really, really well, or is it very expressive with this, or?
I try and avoid speaking about coffees in terms of roast, because I think it sets the wrong frame of reference when you're going into brewing coffee. You typically want something that would be a little bit sweeter, something that doesn't have a ton of acidity in terms of profile. So something that is maybe a bit more on the marshmallowy side of the sweetness, or like caramelized sugars with maybe a tropical fruit note to it. That typically works really well, especially at high concentrations. It's a really balanced profile. If you like stuff that's pushed darker, you're not going to have any problems with this. Stuff that is pushed lighter, just because it's less soluble and it's harder to extract things from, might take a bit more work and a finer grind, but you can still get somewhere really interesting with it if you play around with it.
Yeah. One note on that also: do not grind too fine, because you will end up with, as I've experienced, why isn't the damn thing going down? Why does it take arm day in order to compress it? So that's a very it's a very good note to make on that.
Yeah, you basically want to be finer than you would a traditional French press grind, but slightly coarser than a typical pour over. So like pretty much smack dab in the middle.
Yeah,
on your ode, that's like 4.5.
Yeah, I was looking at my Odie, and I think that's set right now. Well, I'm going to grind today, but like 3 1/3, maybe I'll try 4. I don't know. Figure it out.
Yeah.
Brian, any comments on the American Press?
This is all new to me. Alex mentioned it to me the other day, and his detailed rundown of it just now is really my first detailed introduction to it, and I'm fascinated. So I try not to get myself too many brewing devices, but I have a hard time saying no, and he did such a good job of explaining that. I especially like his reference to, like, because of our customer base and what they're used to, like, I have to speak in roast profiles quite frequently, but I've developed a way to kind of like do quick translations for people, to say, okay, if this is what you're used to, these are kind of the flavor characteristics of what you're used to, and the other ways of doing it as a roaster result in different flavor characteristics. So that's one way that I've come up with to talk to people about flavor rather than roast profile.
I love that it's the talk. That's the talk in coffee. It's great.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, we all need translation at some point. I mean,
yeah,
we do.
You try to go from try to do the Starbucks to reality, translation is a fun one. What's this blonde roast thing? Well,
Mommy, what's a dark roast? Well,
when a bean loves a roaster. Okay. All right, Brian, your turn. You have the French press or Aeropress?
Aeropress. I don't use an Aeropress much anymore, but it was my bridge from a French press to what I now tend to brew with, which is pour over. In the middle of that, I used heavily an Aeropress for a couple of years, and I still love them. I like to introduce them to people who want to do manual brewing, and are curious about it, want to try it out. If they're coming from like a home coffee pot type situation, they're cheap, they're easy to use and learn on, they're really easy to clean, they're relatively quick, and they're cheap. So it's like, hey, we sell them for about $30 American, and we don't sell a ton of them, but we don't really push them that hard. But for like people who want to try it out, it's like a super low risk and fairly high reward scenario for people. And if you're a nerd, they're like a playground, because you can, like, all the different variables that you can mess with, like, do you do it the traditional way or do you do it the inverted way, and all the other crazy stuff that people have come up with.
Wait, what now? Inverted?
Well, what? It's like the normal way is to set it on the cup and then push down.
Yeah.
Inverted is turn the thing upside down and put the plunger in the bottom, and then use it as an immersion brewer for like a little bit, and then flip it over, like put the cap on, flip it over, and then press it down. So it's like a hybrid immersion and then pressure extraction. So you can go down that rabbit hole if you want to, or you can just keep things simple. So that's my sales pitch for the Aeropress.
Keep things simple as I look at the 11 other devices that I have here.
Right.
That
Yeah, simple.
yeah, I'm unfortunately one of those people that has more tools than I absolutely need to have in order to do it. That's fun. It's all about experimentation. Well, gentlemen, it has been a pleasure. I know time's running up here, but this was great. I appreciate you guys so much. Again, like I've gotten to know Alex, Brian. I look forward to getting to know you more through, you know, my consumer experience with roastery roast, which I have no doubt will be fantastic. I'm not worried about that in the slightest. But next year, you know, as we flip the calendar into 2021, I'd love to have you both back. We can, you know, just keep checking in on this stuff. I mean, community changes all the time, right? The world changes, thank God, all the time. You know, at some point when you Canadians allow us back in, which I find hugely funny that we can take you down here all the time, you know, land and sea, evidently. Not land, whatever. We'll get up to Montreal and then, you know, we can plan that special. You have to really plan to get to Iowa, by the way. You have to really, really plan. But
you got to want.
we'll get out to Brian too and maybe do one of these things, you know, in situ as the case may be. But thank you once again, Brian from Ross Street Roasting Company.
Thanks.
And then Alex from Firstbloom. And gentlemen, it's been a blast. Thanks for building the communities and trust and friendships that you have, and look forward to the greatness that emerges from it.
Cool.
Thank you.
Likewise. Thanks a lot.